Hi, everyone. My name is Emily Dubas, and I'm a speech language pathologist and the clinical services and education manager at the Learning Corp. And I'd like to introduce our speaker today, Amanda Eaton. She is an assistant professor in the Communication Disorders Department at Fontbonne University, and she received a doctorate in psychology with an emphasis in behavioral neuroscience. Her research predominantly focuses on aphasia, right hemisphere processes, and cognitive rehabilitation. And she also worked as a speech language pathologist in adult care and subacute care. She also founded the Group Rehabilitation for Aphasia Communication Effectiveness Program at the Eardley Family Clinic for Speech, Language, and Hearing, and that provides group therapy for adults with aphasia in the St. Louis region. So welcome, Amanda.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here. Okay, so welcome to the webinar. This is the power of practice using homework to support recovery. So just to get this out of the way, again, I'm Amanda Eaton. My financial disclosures are that the Aphasia Bootcamp and the GRACE groups have been funded by grants from the Employee Community Fund at Boeing and the Fontbonne Community Connections through Fontbonne University and by gifts from private donors. My non-financial disclosures, the source of information about people with aphasia discussed in this presentation comes from the Fontbonne University Eardley Family Speech, Language, and Hearing Clinic, where I am employed, but I do not receive additional income for involvement in the Aphasia Bootcamp or GRACE groups.
And my speaker disclosures are I'm an employee of the Learning Corp. That's the creator of the app Constant Therapy, and I have no relevant non-financial relationships. Here are today's learning objectives. You will learn the benefits of a robust home program and the importance of independent and regular practice. We'll also go over 8 principles of deliberate home practice to help you design more effective programs for your clients. So with that, let's get started.
Before we get into the rest of the presentation, I just want to start with how this model for maximal recovery potential was created and briefly the components for this model. So in our clinic, because we are a university clinic, I really call it the aphasia lab, where we can try all types of approaches that are evidence-based, and we don't have a lot of confining barriers. So with that freedom, though, comes a lot of responsibility to make sure that we are delivering the best possible therapy to the clients that we serve. So over the years, we've developed this 3-part model where all components are equally as important. And they are, in the purple, you see the guided intervention. So this is what we think of as traditional speech and language therapy, intensive therapy, group therapy, basically like what we as SLPs do day in and day out. The next component is social support. So we stress with all of our clients that engaging in not only the community, but the aphasia community in particular is a crucial piece of maximal recovery. And we see where guided intervention and social support intersect, that's where our group therapy is. And then the final component, and I can't stress how important this is, and we'll be talking about this for the rest of the webinar, is the independent focus practice. So this includes things like your home programs, your drill activities, and re-engagement in your own recovery. And we see that the intersection of guided intervention and independent focused practice is homework and assigning homework as SLPs on a pretty daily basis. Okay, so in this picture we have the pink dot, which indicates the initial brain injury event, whether it was a traumatic brain injury or perhaps an ischemic stroke. And then the period of time after that is the rapid spontaneous progress or rapid spontaneous healing that the brain undergoes. And then after a while, and this is about 6 months to a year, that spontaneous recovery starts to slow down and perhaps even plateau. And I think for a long time, a lot of patients were told by their physicians or their therapists that after about a year post-stroke or post-injury, that was about as good as it's going to get. And we know that that's absolutely not true. We know that the brain has an incredible power to heal and continue to improve over the lifespan. So that's where the focused effort and intervention really comes into play. After the brain has recovered spontaneously, then therapy and maximum effort will continue to produce gains. Okay, so when we're thinking about ischemic recovery versus neuroplasticity, or the change that occurs after that star on the last slide, we have to think in terms of what the brain is doing when it's recovering. So in any stroke or ischemic event, there is a series of events that occur that cause further damage to the neurons themselves beyond oxygen deprivation or glucose deprivation. And that's called the ischemic cascade. And there's all kinds of medications and interventions or medical interventions that can help minimize the effects of the ischemic cascade, which then leads to what's called the ischemic penumbra. The ischemic penumbra is the area around the initial injury site that kind of shuts down so that the brain doesn't recruit glucose or blood supply that it's not going to get. And that's why right after a stroke, your patients might seem like their function is extremely impaired. And then over the course of days to weeks, they start to demonstrate rapid improvement. Well, that's because that tissue was never really damaged beyond repair to begin with. It really just shut down so that it wouldn't recruit blood supply or glucose demands that weren't there. So as that penumbra begins to shrink over time, then what we're left with is what's called the core zone. And that's the area that where there's tissue loss and damage that's not recoverable. And at that point, that's when our interventions and good quality speech therapy can lead to very significant neuroplastic change. And I'm going to let Emily talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so the topic of neuroplasticity has really spanned decades, and there's a lot of research around neuroplasticity. And so here's just one example from a paper by Kramer et al. And they talk about neuroplasticity in a variety of different ways. They talk about physical rehab, cognitive rehab, and even mental health rehab, and how neuroplasticity plays a role in it. So basically, neuroplasticity is the adaptive capacity of your central nervous system. So when you're learning a new skill, or if there's been some sort of damage to the brain and you have to relearn that skill, it's your brain's ability to form new connections and strengthen those connections over time.
Yeah, we currently have a client in our clinic who had a traumatic brain injury. She actually had to have her entire temporal lobe in her left hemisphere removed. And you can imagine that left her completely nonverbal, but also unable to comprehend any language at all. And now, several years later, she's fully conversational. She is a public speaker and talks about her recovery and her journey. And what we know is that all of her language ability is because of the plastic change in her brain. And her right hemisphere's ability and surrounding lobes ability to learn language processing through neural connections that were not there before.
Wow, that's an incredible,
it's incredible.
An incredible story. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Kramer also talks about different concepts that can help maximize neuroplasticity as well. So one is that neuroplasticity is very experience dependent, and it's very influenced by features in the environment. And so if you want to be working on a skill, you have to be in an environment that's encouraging and facilitating use of those skills. Motivation is also a critical piece, and so you have to be motivated to change and to acquire those skills. And then the last piece is this maintenance. So once you do acquire that skill and form those connections, the work doesn't stop there. You really have to continue to expose yourself and stimulate those connections in the brain. Another paper that discusses neuroplasticity is Klein and Jones, and they talk about 10 principles that can really help promote neuroplasticity. So I'll talk briefly about each one. One is use it or lose it. So essentially, if you're not using that skill, then those connections are going to fade and weaken over time. But on the flip side, if you do use it, then those connections can strengthen over time. Specificity matters. So if you do want to target a skill, you can't just do any old exercise. It needs to be very specific and research to support those connections being stimulated in the brain. Salience also matters. So that means that the work needs to be meaningful, and that helps with motivation. And that's what was discussed in the Kramer paper. Transference means that acquiring a skill in one context can transfer to another behavior or context. Interference means that it can also be negative neuroplastic changes. So an example of this is if someone has aphasia and because they have aphasia, they no longer attempt to speak. That learned non-use of speaking can also cause negative neuroplastic changes. Time also plays a role. So there's different times in people's recovery where you might see more neuroplastic changes. And also age can play a role as well. So the younger brain is thought to be more plastic, but that doesn't mean that the older brain isn't. Neuroplasticity can occur at any age. The last two are very important. So one is repetition. So getting enough reps and enough practice within that skill is very important. But at the same time, it also needs to be at that right intensity. And intensity can be interpreted in a lot of different ways. But you need to be doing the right number of reps and the right amount of challenge as well. And so many researchers and clinicians are also incorporating these principles of neuroplasticity into their practice as well. And so here is an example of a recent publication that used these principles. And so they were looking at how to increase the intensity of practice in a setting that doesn't necessarily allow for very intensive practice, so an outpatient rehab. So they looked at individuals with chronic aphasia who did a 3-week intensive therapy program. And if you look at the pie chart here, this is the makeup of the program. So about half of their intensive therapy was all one-on-one with a speech-language pathologist. But then they supplemented that with group therapy as well as self-managed. And about a third of that of this self-managed care was all computer-based therapy. And so what they found was that over the course of these 3 weeks, there were significant improvements in their communication, in specific language measures, and quality of life ratings. And there was also maintenance in a 6-month follow-up. And this is also discussed with the ASH and NAMS as well, so the National Outcome Measurement System. They published a report in 2017, and here is an example of using more therapy. So they looked at spoken language expression, and they found that more treatment time translated to better outcomes, and bringing a patient to a level 7 required on average 2.5 times the amount of treatment needed to progress to a level 5. So there's a lot of research around the importance of more practice, and we all know that when you are acquiring a new skill, it's really important that you do get that consistent and intensive practice. But what is currently happening? What's the current status of care? Well, it tends to be inconsistent. Let's take a look at some more of the ASH and NAMS data. And so they looked at the number of sessions that people with stroke and brain injury are getting on average across different settings. And this chart here shows you the number of sessions that people in the acute phase are getting. And so you can see that it's kind of evenly distributed across the different buckets, and that's the number of sessions per week. If you look at inpatient rehab, the numbers are kind of skewed to the right. So the majority of these individuals are getting 5 or more sessions per week. But then if you look in outpatient, where people are getting that's the longest part of their stay and the longest part of their rehabilitation, it skews to the other side. And so if we isolate that, you can see about 85% of people with stroke and brain injury are getting 2 sessions or less per week.
All right, so we know that the research is very clear about more therapy equals more recovery. But we also know that people aren't receiving the type of therapy that they need. So that comes down to access and cost. Those are some barriers or practical considerations. Access simply means that there are not a lot of institutions or facilities that offer intensive therapy programs. If you look at a map of the United States, tend to be clustered around the east and west coast with a big gaping hole in the middle of the country. So unless you're fortunate enough to live in one of those areas or are able to travel to one of the facilities that offers intensive programs, you really don't have access. The other piece of it is cost. So a lot of these programs can be tremendously expensive just to participate in the program. And then if you add travel cost or time off work on top of that, it really becomes preclusive for a lot of people. And the last piece of practical considerations, which we'll talk about later on in the presentation, is candidacy. Okay, so how do we bridge the gap from what we do with traditional therapy and the amount of visits that are reimbursed by most insurance companies, and the model for therapy that most people are going to receive? How do we bridge the gap from there to the intensive therapy outcomes that we know are superior based on now years of research and principles of neuroplasticity? Our suggestion is that a robust home program can bridge that divide. And by no means does this minimize what we do as clinicians or undermine our skilled therapy. But as you'll see, there are intentional programs where every aspect is designed for the client by the clinician based on principles of learning and relearning. Okay, so if we compare intensive therapy programs to robust home programs, there's a lot of similarities, but there are certainly some differences, and most of the differences are in favor of the client themselves. So intensive therapy has a significant monetary investment, and the robust home program is very low cost. Intensive programs have a time investment that's fixed, not flexible, and clinician controlled. Robust home programs also have a time investment, but that time investment is flexible and client controlled. Intensive programs require endurance, and robust programs will require endurance. However, you only need minimal endurance to get started, and you can build that up over time at your own pace. Intensive programs disrupt daily routines, and robust home programs can be scheduled around daily routines. And finally, intensive therapy is clinician directed, and the home program is self-directed. Now, I have asterisks by the next two because I'm going to talk a little bit more about this. I feel really strongly about the idea of therapeutic alliance and motivation. Both are going to require this, and this circles back to the idea of candidacy. DiClemente and Prochaska in 1998 developed a trans-theoretical model for understanding and intervening with intentional behavioral change. Their work focused on changing addictive behaviors, but the stages of readiness for change have been somewhat ubiquitous. So they are the pre-contemplation stage. This is when the patient or client does not believe that a problem exists. So we would clinically call this awareness, right? The second stage is the contemplation stage. This is where the patient recognizes a problem exists and they're aware of their deficits. The third is the action phase. This is when they begin therapy or they begin the behavioral change. And the fourth stage is maintenance. And this is when they're incorporating the new behavior into their daily life. It's really important to determine where your patient falls within these stages. Obviously, they need to be in the contemplation stage before initiating any home practice program. So mismatches in the therapeutic objectives and the patient readiness can result in frustration, negative attitudes towards intervention, and then it can fracture the therapeutic alliance. Some patients will have already incorporated practice into their daily routine, but maybe with great success. But for those patients, an SLP designed intentional program can take them that much further.
So Amanda, with the pre-contemplation phase, I'm sure we've all had patients who have started therapy in that phase. And do you have any tips or any suggestions about how to kind of move them on to the contemplation and the action phase? And then a follow-up question too is, do these strategies change depending on what their presentation is? So whether they have aphasia versus a right hemisphere impairment versus a TBI.
Right. So, in general, lack of awareness or inability to monitor one's own errors or even recognize one's own errors can generally be characteristic of maybe right hemisphere damage or frontal lobe damage, whether it's left or right. However, we know that our clients don't read the manual. They don't know what they're supposed to do and what they're not supposed to do based on the site of lesion. And certainly we see lack of awareness or error monitoring in people with or left hemisphere temporal lobe lesions all the time. So this can really occur in anybody. And it really poses a real ethical problem for a lot of clinicians because they don't want to tell someone who doesn't believe that a problem exists that, oh no, you have a problem. So what we focus on here is a lot of discrimination training, starting with really simple discrimination tasks, and then moving to more sophisticated discrimination tasks as their skills start to improve. So sometimes watching videos, a lot of people can judge their errors when they're not occurring, like when they're able to look back and they can devote all of their cognitive resource to just observing the scene versus formulating responses and thinking of answers. So we start there. And then once those discrimination skills get stronger, then we move to more online discrimination tasks. So once you determine that your client is ready, it's really important to foster the therapeutic alliance. So there's hundreds of studies that show that purposeful collaboration and a relationship between the therapist and patient correlates with positive therapeutic process. But even so, the power of the alliance is often far stronger than many realize. And the most effective therapists are those who focus specifically on building that alliance. It's not enough to be motivated. Clients have to believe that what you're prescribing is going to be effective. And this is particularly important for implementing home programs because they take time and rigor and discipline. So just like with any therapy, we have to consider the patient's candidacy by assessing their intrinsic motivation and buy-in and readiness for change in order to build that alliance and that trust. Okay, so the first step in designing this home program that we keep talking about is going back to the goals in the treatment plan. So goals should be written at the independent level. And what I mean by that is that if it requires moderate or even maximal skilled support of the clinician to accomplish the goal, then that's not a realistic goal because you're not going to be following your client around as they move through life, and it's not functional for them. So even if the goal is very, very minimal, it has to be at an independent level. Now, the one caveat there is that if minimal support is not skilled, then minimal support is okay. So what I mean by that is that any person who's speaking to someone with aphasia or cognitive deficits is going to take on a lot of the conversational burden naturally. They might speak slower, they might speak louder, they might provide clarifications, they might provide more wait time or prompts, just naturally. And that's the minimal support that would be okay in writing a goal. I encourage students and clients to think about 1 to 2 goals at a time. So if that's not to say that there aren't a lot of things that they would like to work on or improve, but we're just going to focus on 1 to 2 at a time. What we're trying to do is to laser focus on that one goal, accomplish it, and then move on to the next. It's important to incorporate self-ratings into goals so that clients can develop that sense of what it feels like to either accomplish the goal or to be accurate in whatever that goal is. And then ongoing input and feedback on progress towards the goal so that they can see their progress, be motivated, and keep going. So here, the client is going to set the goal. So these are the client's desires, and you can help them move through here by going through the SMART goal checklist. But the client is going to set the goal because they're much more likely to accomplish something that they would like to accomplish than something that you have prescribed to them. The clinician's job is to create the plan to accomplish the goal. And we work with our clients to set SMART goals that are specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely.
So one question I have is, if you have a client who comes who kind of has both a language and a cognitive profile, so let's say that they need to work on listening, reading, writing, speaking, attention, memory, and problem solving. So how do you address all of those different areas if you are only setting one or two goals at a time?
Right, so that's a really good question. So we know that a lot of our clients come with a mixed bag of things that they want to work on. However, when we're creating the plan and the goal, we want to laser focus on that one goal. And that does not mean that they're not going to engage in a lot of activities and a lot of practice that's going to stimulate attention, memory, problem solving, inhibition, all kinds of skills that maybe are either directly related to the goal or maybe not. Maybe it's just practice. So the home program is going to inherently include a lot of skill strengthening that may or may not be directed towards the goal.
And you were mentioning, like for example, if the goal, one of the goals is word retrieval, what are some different ways that you would target that? So I know the one goal is that, but how would you be incorporating, or how would you be addressing that in a variety of different ways?
So word retrieval is interesting. We think of word retrieval as a search and selection process, that we have all of these word competitors and we have to search through them to find the right one. And that is true. However, it's also an inhibiting process. So not only do we have to search and select the accurate word, we have to inhibit all of the inaccurate words. And so by targeting attention, error monitoring, inhibition, you're also improving word finding skills. So that's one way that, are you directly targeting word finding? No. But are you targeting search and selection? Yes. So that might look like a letter word search. It might look like searching in a field of pictures to find the target picture. And then also inhibiting all of those non-targets. Or all of the sham stimulus. So that's one way that you're targeting cognitive skills that are going to improve a language skill, because that language skill has cognitive underpinnings.
Yeah, that's a really great way to frame it as well. That you're not limiting yourself to one or two things. The whole network is kind of integrated, and there's such a strong interaction between language and cognition.
Absolutely. Okay, so the independent focused program is made up of 3 different components. And the one we're going to be focusing most on is the drill component. But the program moves from structured to unstructured activities. They are personally relevant. They facilitate improved communication. They build autonomy and confidence. They allow the client to document their progress, which then increases accountability. So for building autonomy, it's really important that the clients keep a daily journal. And this journal could look like a lot of different things for very different people. It could be literally a notebook composition journal. It could be notes on their phone. It could be a picture journal on an iPad. We have a gentleman that takes pictures wherever he goes, and then he categorizes them at the end of the day into different files. And that's how he documents his day and how he communicates with others. So journaling is also going to include the homework log. So this is where you're going to keep track of your daily homework. We encourage our clients to collect artifacts from the community and from the events that they attend and engage in so that they have a reference to talk about later. This is a place for them to put their to-do list, their grocery list, pertinent personal information. They take their journals to doctor's appointments and maybe have the doctor write down what they're supposed to remember or what their test results were or whatever it is. And what this does ultimately, in addition to building autonomy, it provides a referent for successful discourse, which is so important. You can see someone's face light up when they realize that you're on the same page and you understand what they said. And by having a concrete artifact or something written in a journal, once we know what the referent is, and we know what the context is, then it's much more easy to decode the errors. So if someone makes a phonemic error or semantic error and we know the context, we kind of know what they meant because we were already on the same page with them, and that's because of the journal. So they're incredibly powerful. So here are some examples of some journals from our intensive therapy program. So if you see on the bottom right, this was day 1 of journaling. So we gave everybody a journal on the first day and said, okay, we want you to write in your journal every day. It can be anything that you want. And so this is one woman in our group. She said, I picked up Zach from SIUE drum camp about 5:15, and that was it. That was all that she wrote for Monday. And then Tuesday, you can see it's again just one sentence. So now on the left of your screen, this is only 6 weeks later after intensive therapy. Not only is she writing in her daily journal, but she's starting to write fictional stories. This one was a children's story about a picnic with ants. And you can see the progress from even the dates on there, Monday 6/12 to looks like Monday 7/17. So tremendous progress. The journal entry in the top right, on the other hand, is a woman who really struggled with writing, but she could draw. So she drew pictures of what she did. This is when she went to Shakespeare on the Park, sat on Art Hill in St. Louis with her dog and watched A Winter's Tale. And then she commented, I don't get it. And that's not the aphasia, that's Shakespeare. So we had a good laugh about that. But you can see that when she's able to show us those pictures, we know exactly where she was and what she did. And it really facilitates successful communication.
The difference from that initial journal in June to the journal entry 1 month later, it's so incredible.
Yeah.
And so it looks like she really took this form of homework to heart. So she really incorporated it into her daily routine. And was she a journaler beforehand?
No, definitely not. So she's a scientist. She studies fungus. And she was a quilter, and she actually went back to quilting one-handed, but most recently she has written, or she's in the process of writing and illustrating a children's book. One of the other things that she does every day is she takes the dictionary word of the day and writes a haiku. So she participated in our creative writing group, where they learned about poetry and talked about the components. So now she's been writing a daily haiku and sharing it on our Facebook page.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, it's really cool. Okay, moving on to the more structured portion of the home program. There are multiple steps, and the first step is to choose the task. So tasks can target the specific goal or supporting skills important for those behaviors. So language, we know, requires a lot of prerequisite skills, such as attention, memory, response inhibition, problem solving. And it's extremely important that the tasks be high effort. So numerous studies have shown that successful retrieval of information requires effort, or requiring effort is more important than successful retrieval that is easy. Given that information, we like to incorporate what we call Goldilocks tasks. So Goldilocks tasks are easy enough to be completed independently, because remember, these goals are targeted at an independent level, but challenging enough to affect change. So it's not our intention to increase the work of family or care partner burden through homework. These are things and tasks that the client should be able to do on their own.
Porridge is just right.
Yes, the porridge is just right. Exactly. So but challenging enough that it's high effort.
Mhm.
Okay, the next piece of it is time versus completion based. So, what I mean by this is that you're not assigning worksheets that are one and done, you're assigning tasks over a period of time. So, for example, I want you to work on this task for 20 minutes. And then move on to the next task. Or I want you to do this for 15 minutes a day, not just until you're done. If you're finished, do it again. So this could be generative tasks like writing sentences. So I want you to write as many sentences as you can within 15 minutes. That might look like one sentence or one sentence fragment for one client. It could be 30 sentences for another client. So it really helps meet people where they are, but ensures that they're engaged in that highly effortful practice for a duration of time. And continual versus fixed really just is similar to the time versus completion. This means that these activities can go on and on and on and on and on instead of like a worksheet one and done, which is really important for and good news for the SLP, because you're not printing off or going back to the well to find more resources and giving your clients a 500 page binder of activities.
That's also where maybe technology can also be helpful. Have you found that in your own with technology?
Absolutely. Yeah. So if we have clients who prefer to use their iPad or computer, then that's a great place to incorporate activities that are time versus completion based. We like to do kind of an integrative approach where they're using technology, they're using pencil to paper, they're playing games. So yeah, technology is great for that.
And the time versus completion based piece, it's a pretty big mindset change for a
Yeah.
lot of people. I
Right.
think we all go through life liking to feel like you can just sit down and do everything in one sitting and check it off your to-do list.
Right.
And that time-based piece is so critical. If you do view it as completion based, the task can feel almost so burdensome that it's
Right.
really difficult to even initiate. So if you just say, 10 minutes, that's all you need to do, as much as you get done, that can reduce some of the burden there. And it can also really help with symptom management too. So if someone had a TBI and they have a lot of headaches or somatosensory issues, if you just set it to a certain amount of time, that can help them kind of manage some of the types of symptoms that they might be having as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and a great way to think about it is if you play an instrument, or I think about my daughter when she practices her piano, she has to practice for 15 minutes a day. And that doesn't mean finish the song that you're working on. Maybe she's at a stage with that song where she can't finish it. Maybe she's just getting a few bars done in 15 minutes. Or maybe she's further along and she plays the song 15 times over in 15 minutes. But the idea is that it's time,
Hmm.
a- and not do it till you're done.
Right.
hmm Okay, so the second step in the deliberate home practice plan, after you've chosen the task, is to set practice goals. So what this means is that this is these are short-term steps towards the long-term goal. Or the treatment goal, but the long-term practice goal would be a 4 to 6 week session where you're going to be maybe practicing this goal multiple times throughout the 4 to 6 weeks, but this is where you want to be by the end of that time period. Mini goals might be 5 to 10 sessions, and then every day should start with a daily practice goal. So maybe this looks like doing flashcards for 15 minutes, and you want to get 80% of the flashcards correct in that time. And recording your progress is where the journaling comes back into play, where you're going to document what you did, how close you got to that goal, make adjustments if necessary, hopefully celebrate that you accomplished the goal, and then move on. And again, the journal provides the opportunity to reflect on that progress.
Yeah, and the daily practice goals, it sounds like the client can pick many different activities to address those goals. So it kind of brings it back to what we were talking about before, where you might be working on word retrieval or working on memory, but there's a lot of different ways that you can address it. And that can also keep people motivated long term and not feel like you're doing the same thing every day.
Right, exactly. Okay, so the next principle of the home practice plan is to vary the context. So varying the context is going to increase generalization and transfer. So encoding variability or learning variability or differences in the context in which the skill is learned is thought to produce better retention because it increases the number of potential retrieval routes in the brain, which increases the probability of a successful retrieval. And that's all from Bauer 1972, so going way back, Estes and Martin 1968. So one example that I like to use for this is let's say, for example, that you're targeting pronouns. We know that pronouns are specifically challenging for people with Broca's type aphasia. So by varying the context, what that means is that maybe in one activity or one task, we're going to produce simple sentences including one pronoun. Maybe on another practice session, we're going to read a text and we're going to highlight the pronouns and then highlight the reference and connect them. And then maybe in another activity, we're matching pictures with pronouns in a flashcard type of set. So you're still working on pronouns, but you're varying the context, which again is leading to less memorization, more learning, and learning in an enriched way with multiple different routes. Okay, the next piece is the intentional schedule. The intentional schedule includes 3 components. The first is spaced retrieval, the second one is an expanded schedule, and the third is interleave schedule. So there's a wealth of basic psychological research that demonstrates that retrieval practice, or the act of retrieving from long-term memory, leads to powerful and persistent learning, particularly when the retrieval is effortful. So we've already kind of tackled the effortful component, but now we're thinking about how to space these practices apart. So Erica Middleton and her colleagues have done a lot of research on the benefits of errorless learning versus retrieval practice. And her work has demonstrated that treatment centered on retrieval from long-term memory far surpasses any potential decrement from learning error. So there's something special about search and selection for learning that can't be achieved through repetition. The spacing effect refers to the learning advantage with repeated training opportunities that are distributed over time rather than massed practice. So we'll look at the figure up at the top where we have spaced practice. There's an initial study, then there's a gap or a lag time in between, then we have a review, then a retention interval, and then a final test, versus a mass practice where we're studying, reviewing, and then taking a test. So something special happens in the time in between.
I always think of this as like a path in your brain where the first time you learn it, you make that connection, and it's almost like this really, scarce dirt road path that you make. But the more times you go over it, the more ingrained it becomes.
Right.
But it takes time. So if you tried to do it all in one sitting, that would be too much and it wouldn't function as well. But over time, that's when those paths become more and more ingrained and established.
Exactly. Yeah, and there's a lot of healing and a lot of recovery that occurs in those quiet times when you're not practicing. Similar to weightlifting, your muscle isn't building when you're lifting the weights. It's building when it's recovering after the workout. Okay, so the spacing effects benefit various types of learning, such as episodic memory, concept acquisition, and procedural learning in learners across the age span. So it's a really important component. And what this looks like when we go into an example of the schedule is space in between activities and revisiting those activities over time. So the next component is the intentional schedule, and it is an expanded schedule, which is when the lag between each successive review progressively increases over time. So the justification for expanding retrieval practice is that, number one, having an early retrieval attempts that occur fairly soon after the initial learning ensures a high rate of retrieval success. Two, the retrieval slows forgetting, so subsequent retrieval is more successful. So the practice or learning opportunities can be pushed further and further apart in time to ensure that practice continues to be effortful and not trivial. So that's an important piece too. So if we look at, say for example, you have written in someone's homework that they are going to do activity A, and you specify exactly what activity A is. You would give them a calendar and train them on how to do this on their own for subsequent months to come. But if we look at activity A, we've done it on day 1, day 2, and day 3. So that's the piece where you're getting multiple exposure to that task over a short period of time in the initial learning phase. Then we're going to take a break on day 4 where we incorporate activity B, so a different task. And then on day 5, we're going to bring A back in. And then on day 8, we're going to do A again. Then on day 11, 17, 25, and then the 7th of the next month. So what that means is that all that space in between was time where you didn't address that goal. So the learning is more salient over time, but it also means that activity A on day 7 of the next month might still be challenging because you haven't done it since the 25th of the month before. So we're keeping the effort up while maintaining the progress over time. Mm-hmm. And you'll see that the different activities are also interspersed, and those are on the same schedule, just offset. So what that would look like in a practical sense when we talk about time periods is maybe on day 1, 2, and 3, you spend all 30 minutes of your practice on activity A. And then maybe on on day 5, you're splitting your time between activity A and activity B. So you're still doing 30 minutes of practice, but you're only doing 15 minutes of each. The next piece or principle is interleaving. So this is an intentional way to arrange stimuli or practice trials in order to maximize learning. And all of these principles come from cognitive neuroscience and cognitive science in learning specifically. They don't necessarily apply to brain injured populations, but they have been found to be beneficial in all populations at all ages for all types of tasks. So interleave practice has been found to lead to superior learning through enhancing skills like classification and discrimination and inductive learning. It's also called the discriminative contrast hypothesis. So it's important to stay within the skill category so that the patient is clear about what they're practicing. So for example, pronouns, we're not going to intersperse pronouns with prepositions, but we are going to contrast the different types of pronouns so that they can learn to discriminate between between the pronouns and classify them. So for example, instead of doing a set of pronoun practice that's all she, she, he, or learning them all separately, we're going to contrast them. So he, she, I, she, he, she, I versus, again, that blocked practice. So this was a really interesting study that examined the principles of interleaving. So a sample of paintings used in Cornell and Bjork 2008 exposed subjects to paintings one at a time. So in the blocked study condition, paintings were grouped by artist so that subjects saw 6 paintings by artist A, followed by 6 paintings by artist B, and so forth. And then in an interleaved condition, subjects saw 1 painting by artist A, followed by 1 by B, and so forth until they had cycled through every artist 6 times. Okay. On the final testing, subjects were required to identify the artists for previously unseen paintings, and the people in the interleave group outscored the blocked group 59 versus 36%. So that was a really robust finding that they didn't change anything but the presentation of the stimuli, and it led to significantly higher learning, almost double. They did almost twice as well in the interleaved condition. Okay, so the next piece is testing. So testing enhances learning. It's also called the testing effect, and it's based on the finding that test taking leads to better retention over time compared to studying that material for an equivalent amount of time. So my students love to hear this because I tell them, don't just study, 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 practice, or give yourself a practice test. Test yourself, test yourself. That's the best way to study or to learn. So we also want to vary the question, phrasing, or stimuli to promote transfer. So you're not going to memorize the material, you're actually going to learn it when you vary the type of question that you ask. And this promotes autonomy, awareness, accountability, and also encourages clients when they're able to test themselves. So over on the right, we have a couple of figures here. This was a study by Butler 2010, where they looked at the differences in testing versus studying on a final exam. So we have two different types of information. We have factual information and conceptual information. You can see by the bars that performance was similar between the two types of information. And in the white, we have students who just restudied the information. And then we have, in the light gray, students who took a test that was exactly like the final test, or the practice test was exactly like the final test. And they did quite well. And then we also have, in the dark gray, the variable test. So this is where the practice test questions were a little bit different. They asked the same type of information, but they asked it in a different way. And we can see that they're performing just as well as people who had the words phrased exactly the same way. So that's really strong findings that testing, or the testing effect, is really powerful. Okay, and then the next piece is the timing. So what we're looking for are short sessions. And what I mean by that is we want those study sessions or time during practice to be between 20 and 30 minutes. 20 to 30 minutes of focused attention, high effort. And then we're going to do multiple sessions per day, but it's really important that clients take a 10 to 15 minute break in between. And this is to prevent fatigue and also improve learning. So there's a curvilinear relationship between homework time and achievement. And the big question that a lot of research asks is how long should studying last? How much time should students spend in homework? How long should our clients participate in homework outside of therapy? And shockingly, the literature hasn't reached a clear consensus on the duration of homework. However, there is a relationship between homework time and achievement. So MIC 2006 compared students' math scores with the amount of time that they reported doing homework, and he found that students who reported spending between 60 to 90 minutes per day on homework received the highest average math scores, whereas students who said that they spent more than 90 minutes or less than 60 minutes a day on homework achieved lower scores. So we want to stay in that area of best performance, or that sweet spot that's right between 60 to 90 minutes a day. And again, we break that up into 20 to 30 minute sessions with a 10 to 15 minute break in between.
Yeah, I think one interesting thing is that there is research looking at how much therapy, how much practice is optimal for people with neurological disorders.
Mm-hmm.
And while there is a lot of research out there, there really isn't a consensus about what that number is. So one thing to keep in mind is that while this research is looking at healthy adults, and so it's not the same population, but it is something that we can kind of use and apply to our practice, and use research on healthy adults to try to figure out, what is the optimal amount for that person.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a really interesting slide where you recommended about 20 to 30 minutes of therapy at a time. So my question is, oftentimes therapy is longer. So many clients come in for a 60-minute session or a 45-minute session. There's other programs that are very intensive that might be a full day. So
Mhm.
how does this really fit into some of those models?
Right. So when you think about what occurs in a therapy session over 50 minutes and extract out the minutes that the client was actually engaged in high focused, high effort cognitive processing, it's not that much, right? There's a lot of conversation, there's a lot of time in between trials, there's a lot of transitioning into a different activity. So I would say that in most 50-minute sessions, you're really getting probably closer to 20 to 30 minutes of that high focused effort on the part of the client. And same thing in an intensive program throughout the day. Obviously, that's going to be taxing
Mhm.
and also really challenging for a lot of people with brain injury, which again gets back to the candidacy. Are they able to tolerate that amount of therapy?
Because it is a neurological population, and there might be varying levels, and so some patients might be completely able to focus for that 20 to 30-minute time period, but there's others who might only be able to do maybe 2 minutes
Right.
or 30 seconds, or even on the other end, there might be people who can focus for longer. So there is that variability across the population to kind of fit what works best for that person.
Right. Yeah. And these programs are designed so that they can meet clients wherever they are. So we have one participant now who she can attend for about 2 minutes. So her little mini goal is to attend for 30 seconds longer, or maybe even 15 seconds longer, which seems so small and insignificant. But when you're working your way towards cognitive endurance, those little bits make a big difference. And over time, we would hope to see that she expands to 5 minutes, 10 minutes. And when you think about that um, from a functional perspective in activities of daily living, that makes a big
Mhm.
difference. And also with language comprehension and working memory function.
Mhm.
Okay, so the frequency is the next piece. So we recommend that clients practice frequently, and by that we mean every day. So we're looking for 1 to 2 sessions on therapy days. So if they attend therapy that day, then maybe 30 minutes to an hour of homework, and then 2 to 3 sessions on non-therapy days. So if they did not come for therapy, or they didn't engage, they didn't go to work or whatever it was, then a good hour to hour and a half. Of practice. And then again, it's even more important to rest frequently. And that means that you rest either before or after your sessions, but that you also rest in between. So by no means do we want anybody engaging in something um, highly effortful and with that degree of focus for an hour at a time or an hour and a half at a time. The quality would just be really poor at that point, in addition to just draining all resources so that can't do anything else for the rest of the day. You have to go to bed. So taking those 10 to 15-minute breaks in between is really important to reset.
So I'm thinking about when I've learned new skills. When I first get started, I kind of come out and I'm really motivated and I'm going to practice every single day. But then over time, I might get a little burnt out, or my motivation might wax and wane. So we've probably all seen this with clients as well. So do you have any recommendations, or how do you manage that if a client, comes in and says, I can't practice daily anymore. What would you do?
Yeah, so that happens really frequently. And the idea is to give them enough options and help them see the value of daily tasks that they would not have otherwise considered to be homework. So even though, we've talked about a very intentional program where you're interleaving and you've got spaced retrieval and an expanding schedule. That's all ideal. That's the goal that we're working towards, but it doesn't mean that you have to stick to that by the book. There's a lot of flexibility there, and there's a lot of opportunity to swap out activities that maybe the client would otherwise feel like were irrelevant. So, for example, we have one gentleman who he really wants to be more engaged with his daughter who lives out of state. So we told him, if for your homework that day you want to make a phone call to her or get on FaceTime or write her an email, that counts. Anytime that you're engaged in anything that is difficult, whether it's enjoyable or not, you're doing your homework. Recently, we had a woman who's been attending our clinic for several years, and she said, I don't want to do homework anymore. I'm tired of it. I'm not doing it anymore. And I said, well, you know what? That's okay, because you've enrolled in a candy making class. You've enrolled in a cake decorating class. She volunteers several times a week. She works out at the gym. She's reading again for pleasure. She never did that before. She's meditating. And I said, you are doing your homework. All of these things that you're doing are in place of that drill practice that you would have otherwise been doing if you hadn't just gotten back to life. So that's perfectly okay too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're kind of reframing how people view homework. So in school, you do homework and it's not very fun.
Right.
But what we want to try to incorporate is that you want things to be meaningful to you and a part of your daily life. And so if you're really interested in reading, you're joining a book club. If you really like technology and you want to be doing things on your phone or your tablet, you can do that. If you want to be joining different clubs or conversation, you can do that. And so it sounds like in your practice as well, when the patient's involved in shaping the goals and picking what types of activities they're doing to target those goals, you're also building this arsenal for them where they can be picking and choosing what types of things they want to be doing that day to be working on them.
Yeah. So I tell clients all the time, if you're too busy living your life to do your homework, then that's a win.
Mm-hmm. Or you've incorporated it without knowing.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Well, right. Your life is your homework because you're engaged and it's difficult and you're focused. You're going to make improvement.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so some practical homework ideas. And this is not a complete list. You can come up with anything that you like to do as long as it fits those parameters. But here's some examples. So we have different types of apps, memory games, script practice, so practicing what you want to order at your favorite restaurant, flashcards, incorporating daily journaling, making phone calls, sending emails, text messages, social media. That can all be a homework task where you're setting mini goals and recording progress. Things like story retell, identifying main characters, plot, resolution, beginning, middle, and end, discourse skills. These are really important across different types of clinical populations, whether they have aphasia or cognitive deficits. Listing words and categories, and then nonverbal tasks like knitting or completing a puzzle or working on a puzzle. This sometimes is a really good starting place for people who are less verbal and not able to engage in all of these other tasks, but they're doing something where they're engaging in a highly effortful, highly focused activity over a sustained period of time. And strengthening those cognitive networks is going to strengthen their language networks.
You can really target a variety of different skills and goals with the same activity, which is fantastic. So you can kind of tweak it depending on what you're working on with that person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and these, again, are just some ideas. The list goes on and on.
Yeah. Well, great. Well, thank you so much, Amanda, for joining the webinar today and for sharing all of this fantastic information. We hope that the audience, that you enjoyed today's presentation. And if you have any questions at all, you can always reach out to us. We'd love to hear your questions and your feedback as well. So Amanda, thank you so much for your time today.
Absolutely. I'm happy to do it. And I'm happy to share any other resources or answer questions that people have. Really, the network of SLPs across the country is the best resources that we have. So it's really important to share your information. Don't be afraid to ask for other people's resources, especially when it comes to making homework programs.